A millionaire's son was mysteriously wasting away until the maid discovered a secret that no one in the mansion dared to see. Alexander was only 7 years old, yet his life seemed far removed from the ordinary childhood of most children. He lived in a massive, sparkling mansion with high ceilings, marble floors, and gardens that stretched as far as the eye could see. His father was a wealthy businessman, a man whose success was known in every corner of the city. People often said Alexander had everything a child could want: toys that no other child had seen, clothes from famous designers, and a life of comfort most could only dream of. But wealth could not protect him from what was about to happen. It started on an ordinary morning. Alexander had woken up feeling a little strange, complaining of a queasy stomach. His mother, a graceful woman who spent her mornings attending to social engagements and charity functions, brushed it off as a minor upset. "Maybe you ate too much dessert last night," she said with a soft smile, smoothing his hair. But as the hours passed, the queasy feeling turned into violent vomiting. Alexander's small body shook with each bout, and the sound echoed through the vast halls of the mansion. The family doctor was summoned immediately. He was a man who had treated the children of the city's elite for decades and had seen many illnesses. But Alexander's condition puzzled him. He checked the boy thoroughly, listening to his heartbeat, examining his throat, testing his reflexes. He ordered blood tests, stomach scans, and even considered rare diseases that only a few children in the world might experience. But nothing seemed to explain the relentless vomiting. As the day passed, the mansion grew tense. Servants whispered among themselves, worried but cautious, careful not to alarm the parents. The opulent rooms that had once echoed with laughter now felt heavy with worry. Alexander's father paced back and forth, his expensive shoes clicking against the polished marble floors, his usually confident demeanor replaced by a growing sense of helplessness. He had spent his life controlling businesses, solving financial crises, and making important decisions with precision. But here, in his own home, faced with his son's suffering, he felt powerless. Alexander's mother, usually calm and composed, now hovered around him constantly. She held his hand as he retched, her eyes red from worry and sleepless nights. She tried every remedy suggested by the doctors, from homeopathic solutions to the most modern medications, but nothing worked. Each failed attempt left her more anxious. The fear in her eyes was mirrored by everyone in the household. The vomiting became more than just a medical problem. It disrupted the rhythm of the entire house. Meals were postponed, meetings canceled, and even the staff seemed anxious, tiptoeing around the boy's room. Every sound, the creak of a door, the clatter of a tray made Alexander jump, and sometimes worsened his nausea. It was as if the mansion, with all its wealth and grandeur, had been trapped in a quiet, anxious cloud. Despite being surrounded by luxury, Alexander felt isolated. His friends were away at boarding schools or living in distant mansions, and he was confined to his own room, sick and miserable. He missed running in the garden, playing with his favorite toys, and listening to the stories his father sometimes told him in the evenings. The vibrant life of a millionaire's son had suddenly shrunk to a small room filled with worried adults in the cold. Clinical presence of doctors. Each visit by the doctor seemed more frustrating than the last. Tests came back normal, and treatments brought little relief. The adults debated feverishly, discussing possibilities no child should ever hear. Rare infections, allergies, perhaps even something genetic. But Alexander just felt worse. He could sense the worry, the tension in the room, and it frightened him. Children are often more perceptive than adults realize, and he noticed how his parents looked at each other with strained expressions, how the servants whispered outside his door, and how the grand halls of the mansion suddenly felt silent and undelinquent. The boy's condition had become the focus of the entire household. Every decision, every conversation revolved around him. Meals were carefully prepared and tested. Floors were cleaned to perfection, and yet Alexander continued to vomit. Doctors consulted each other, bringing in specialists from the city, yet all seemed baffled. Each failed treatment added weight to the already heavy atmosphere. And even the father's usually calm voice began to crack when talking about his son. It was during one particularly long night that the reality of the situation became undeniable. Alexander had vomited repeatedly and could barely keep any water down. The parents sat by his bed, exhausted and desperate. They had tried everything the doctors suggested, yet the illness persisted. The silence of the mansion, normally a symbol of wealth and control, now felt oppressive. The family, used to solving problems with money or influence, realized that some things like the health of a child could not be bought or commanded amidst the growing worry. Alexander's small voice would sometimes whisper questions, "Am I going to be okay?" Or "Why won't it stop?" These questions, innocent yet filled with fear, pierced through the hearts of the adults around him. It was a moment of vulnerability that reminded everyone that despite their wealth, they were still human, still powerless in the face of suffering. And so, the first part of this story closed with Alexander's illness continuing. A mysterious and relentless problem that no money, doctor, or authority could solve. The mansion, filled with riches and luxury, had become a place of quiet dread. Everyone waited, hoping for a clue, a sign, or a miracle that could restore the life of the young boy. Unseen by the family, however, someone in the background, a quietly observant maid, was beginning to notice small details that might one day change everything. Maria had only been working in the mansion for a few weeks when she first noticed Alexander's suffering. She was a young maid, quiet and unassuming, with a gentle way of observing things that others often overlooked. While the doctors and the family focused on expensive tests, medications, and theories, Maria spent her days moving quietly through the halls, preparing meals, cleaning rooms, and carrying out tasks that no one really noticed. But unlike the adults, she had the unique advantage of observing Alexander closely without the pressure of status or ego clouding her judgment at first. Maria thought Alexander's illness was like any other sickness. She had seen children fall ill before, and she knew how fragile they could be. But something about his constant vomiting, the patterns she noticed, and the way he reacted to his surroundings felt different. She began paying attention in small, careful ways. When she brought him water or soup, she noticed certain times when he would immediately feel worse. When she helped him to the bathroom or cleaned up after another bout, she watched how his body reacted to the smells, the food, and even the rooms he spent time in. The family dismissed her early observations. "He's just a child," the mother said lightly. "He'll recover soon." The father, absorbed in business calls and financial matters, barely looked up from his papers. The doctors nodded politely, but didn't take her seriously, focusing instead on their charts and expensive equipment. Maria felt frustration growing in her chest. But she also felt something stronger, a determination to help the boy, no matter what anyone else thought. She began keeping her own mental notes, observing Alexander in ways that the professionals could not. She noticed small patterns at first, subtle things that seemed insignificant to others. Alexander would vomit more after eating certain foods, like fruits that were slightly overripe or snacks left on the table too long. She saw that he seemed to react badly after spending time alone in certain rooms of the mansion, especially the pantry and the kitchen corners where old food was stored. Maria began connecting dots quietly in her mind, wondering if the cause of his illness was something environmental rather than medical. Maria also paid attention to Alexander's behavior beyond the illness. She noticed that he seemed anxious when walking past certain areas, sometimes covering his nose or looking uncomfortable near particular shelves or cupboards. He would occasionally whisper to himself, mentioning a smell he didn't like, or saying he felt sick because of that room. To anyone else, these could have been childish complaints, but Maria knew children often sensed things adults could not. These tiny clues, she realized, could be the key to understanding why he was so unwell. Over the next few days, she started to observe the household more closely. She would peek into storage rooms while performing her cleaning duties, noticing that some foods had been forgotten and left to rot, while others were kept past their expiration dates. Small containers of milk, cream, and pastries were tucked behind shelves, hidden from view, probably overlooked by the busy staff and family. Maria realized that these could be dangerous to a child's sensitive stomach, especially if Alexander was somehow consuming them regularly. Her curiosity grew into quiet action. Maria began tracking what Alexander ate when he ate it, in the subsequent episodes of vomiting. She noticed that he vomited almost immediately after eating certain foods prepared by the mansion's kitchen. While he seemed fine when eating fresh fruits or simple, plain meals, she prepared herself. Even though she was just a maid, her careful observations began to form a clearer picture than the tests and charts that surrounded him. Despite her careful attention, Maria had to tread carefully. She couldn't openly question the doctors or the family, who were highly protective and proud, sometimes dismissive of the help from the lower staff. She learned to gather her evidence quietly, making mental notes, and watching patterns in Alexander's reactions. She would even speak gently to him, asking subtle questions. "How do you feel after eating this?" Or "Which room makes you feel worse?" Alexander, perhaps sensing her genuine concern and kindness, began to trust her in a way he didn't trust the doctors or even his parents at times. He started answering her honestly, sharing the smallest details of how he felt. What smelled bad, what made his stomach hurt. Maria also began observing the kitchen and storage practices more thoroughly. She noticed that the head chef, though skilled, often relied on pre-made ingredients stored in bulk. Some of these items were old, sometimes past their expiration. But because the mansion was large, it was easy for such items to go unnoticed. Maria realized that Alexander, being curious and sometimes sneaky, like children are, might have eaten these spoiled foods without anyone realizing it. The thought made her nervous, but it also strengthened her resolve to figure out the cause before it got worse. One evening, as Maria cleaned the pantry, she discovered a hidden corner behind tall shelves where old food had been piled and forgotten. The smell was faint but sour, and she immediately thought of Alexander. She remembered how he had recoiled from certain smells earlier in the week. Could it be that something as simple as spoiled food was causing all this suffering? The idea seemed almost too easy, too ordinary to explain the mystery doctors had been struggling with. But her observations kept pointing back to it. Meanwhile, Alexander's health continued to fluctuate. On days when he avoided certain foods, he seemed slightly better, and Maria carefully recorded every instance in her mind. She began speaking softly to the other servants, subtly asking questions about where ingredients came from, how long they had been stored, and if anyone had noticed any spoilage. Though no one thought much of her questions at first, Maria felt that each answer brought her closer to understanding what was wrong. Maria also began building a quiet bond with Alexander. She comforted him during episodes of vomiting, held his hand when he felt scared, and whispered stories to distract him. This emotional connection allowed her to notice even the smallest reactions, a grimace at a smell, a hesitation before eating a dish, or a sudden request to avoid a certain room. To others, these might have seemed trivial, but Maria knew they were clues. Over time, she realized that this mystery was not about illness alone. It was about careful observation, patience, and listening to the child. Things that wealth and medicine had failed to provide. While the doctors relied on tests and charts, Maria relied on her senses, attention to detail, and empathy. She started to feel a quiet confidence that she could help Alexander, even if everyone else doubted her. By the end of her second week observing him, Maria had a theory. She suspected that spoiled food hidden in parts of the mansion, possibly the pantry or the neglected corners of the kitchen, was the source of Alexander's illness. She wasn't entirely sure yet, but her observations had led her further than anyone else in the household. The boy's repeated vomiting, his reactions to certain smells and tastes, and the hidden corners of the mansion all seemed connected. Maria realized that this was her chance to do something meaningful. Though she was just a maid, unseen, and often overlooked, she had the insight that the doctors and family lacked. She quietly resolved to dig deeper, to observe more closely, and eventually to confront the family with her findings. She didn't know how they would react, but she felt certain that Alexander's suffering could not continue without answers. And so, as the nights grew longer and Alexander continued to suffer, Maria watched, waited, and gathered her evidence. She became the unseen guardian, quietly piecing together a puzzle that no one else in the mansion could solve. In the vast, cold, and wealthy house, it was her quiet attention, her care, and her willingness to notice what others ignored that offered the first hope that Alexander might finally be healed. Maria had grown more determined with each passing day. After observing Alexander closely and noticing his reactions to food and rooms in the mansion, she decided it was time to investigate more thoroughly. She knew she had to be careful. The family valued their status and often dismissed the opinions of household staff. But Maria's worry for Alexander outweighed her fear of being ignored or reprimanded. She felt responsible in a way that went beyond her duties, and she was determined to find out what was making the boy so sick. It began quietly, almost like a routine chore. Maria started examining the kitchen and pantry with more attention than she ever had before. She moved silently between shelves, inspecting labels, checking expiration dates, and noticing the faint smell of spoiled food in the corners. She discovered containers that had been left untouched for months that had gone sour, pastries that were stale, and fruits that had rotted but were still stored in trays on the counter. The kitchen staff, overwhelmed by the size of the mansion and the number of ingredients they had to manage, had overlooked these items. Maria realized that these forgotten foods might be the very source of Alexander's illness. Her observations became more detailed each day. She noticed that Alexander's vomiting episodes were closely linked to the foods that had been hidden or neglected. Whenever he ate something from the overlooked corners of the pantry, or even touched food that had been improperly stored, his stomach would revolt. On the days when Maria prepared fresh meals herself, Alexander seemed calmer and occasionally even smiled. These patterns, simple yet clear, strengthened her suspicion that the cause was not medical but environmental. Maria also explored parts of the mansion that no one else paid attention to. There were storage rooms, closets, and small hidden corners behind cabinets that were rarely used. She noticed strange smells, damp, sour, sometimes moldy. Even the marble floors and polished walls could not hide the faint odors of decay. Maria began cataloging these areas in her mind, connecting them to Alexander's symptoms. Each discovery added pieces to a puzzle that seemed invisible to everyone else, including doctors who had spent days running expensive tests with no results. She began to talk to Alexander gently about what he experienced. She asked him subtle questions. Which room feels strange? Or did you feel sick after touching this? The boy, who had become withdrawn and fearful, slowly started opening up to Maria. He pointed to corners of the pantry and shelves in the kitchen that made him feel uneasy. He described smells and textures that seemed harmless to the adults but made his stomach churn. Maria realized that Alexander's intuition, combined with her careful observations, could lead her to the solution that no one else had yet discovered. One afternoon, while cleaning the pantry, Maria discovered a small hidden shelf behind a stack of boxes. It was dark and cramped, and the smell was stronger than anywhere else in the kitchen. On this shelf were containers with mold growing at the edges, spoiled milk, dried pastries with fuzzy green spots, and fruits that had clearly gone rotten weeks ago. She gasped quietly, realizing that Alexander had likely eaten some of these items at some point. This discovery explained why he had been vomiting relentlessly despite every effort by the family and doctors. Maria started testing her theory in small, careful ways. She made notes about the times Alexander had eaten meals from the pantry and compared them with the episodes of vomiting. Every detail matched perfectly. She also tried preparing simple, fresh meals herself. Plain fruits, freshly cooked rice, and lightly boiled vegetables, and served them to Alexander in her gentle way. The difference was noticeable. He seemed calmer, his stomach settled, and he even played quietly for a few minutes without nausea. Maria began to feel a cautious hope. She might finally understand the true cause of his suffering. Her next step was even more daring. Maria decided to investigate how food was stored and handled by the kitchen staff. She watched as assistants unpacked boxes and noticed that items were often left in corners, forgotten, or pushed behind other supplies. The head chef, busy with multiple dishes for the family, didn't notice the smaller details. Maria realized that no one had intentionally harmed Alexander, but negligence, combined with the sheer size of the mansion, had created the perfect conditions for spoiled food to reach the boy. As Maria gathered evidence, she started forming a clear picture in her mind. It wasn't just one spoiled item, it was a combination of several: the old milk, the pastries, the forgotten fruits, and even certain leftovers that had been stored improperly. Together, these items had created a constant source of contamination, enough to make Alexander sick every day. Maria also realized that the boy's immune system, being young and sensitive, was unable to cope with these toxins. This explained why even the best doctors and medications had failed to help him. She also noticed something. Alexander's own habits had unintentionally made things worse. He was curious, often sneaking into cupboards and tasting small bits of food, unaware that some items were no longer safe. This explained why the boy had vomited even when meals seemed fine to the adults. Maria understood that she needed to not only show the family the problem, but also teach them to monitor the boy's access to certain areas, at least until the issue was fully resolved in the evenings. Maria carefully recorded everything she had found in her mind. She mentally organized her observations into patterns, specific foods that triggered vomiting, rooms and areas that seemed dangerous, and Alexander's behavior before and after exposure. She also noted how small changes like giving him fresh meals led to visible improvement. These notes became the foundation for the explanation she would one day give the family. Her determination grew stronger with each day. She realized that while she was only a maid, she had a unique perspective that no one else in the mansion had. Doctors focused on symptoms, the parents on expensive solutions, and the kitchen staff on routine tasks. Maria's strength was her attention to detail, her empathy, and her willingness to observe and act quietly. She felt a growing sense of responsibility. Alexander's health depended on her insight, her courage, and her persistence. One day, while showing Alexander a freshly prepared meal, Maria noticed something remarkable. He smiled for the first time in weeks and even ate without hesitation. It was a small victory, but to her it meant that her theory was likely correct. The boy's body was responding positively when exposed to safe, fresh food. Reinforcing her suspicion that spoiled items had been the hidden cause all along, Maria knew she was close to solving the mystery. The next step would require more courage. She had to present her findings to the family, to the very people who might dismiss her, and convince them that the boy's suffering was not due to a rare disease or medical condition, but something far more ordinary yet overlooked: spoiled and improperly stored food. This would not be easy, but Maria had gathered enough evidence through careful observation and Alexander's reactions to speak with confidence. By the end, this part of her journey, Maria had become more than a maid quietly performing chores. She had become an observer, a detective, and a guardian for Alexander. She had discovered hidden corners of the mansion, identified dangerous foods, and carefully tracked patterns that no doctor or adult had noticed. She now stood on the brink of revealing the truth, ready to confront the family and bring hope to the boy who had suffered so long in the vast mansion. Filled with wealth and power, it was Maria's quiet attention and careful observation that had uncovered the hidden secret. The solution was no longer a mystery. All that remained was to show the family and help Alexander finally recover. Maria knew the time had come. After days of careful observation, connecting the dots, and witnessing Alexander's suffering, she had gathered enough evidence to confront the family. She understood the challenge. She was a maid, often overlooked. While the family and doctors had spent weeks trying to solve a problem they couldn't understand, but Maria's quiet courage and determination outweighed any fear. Alexander's health was at stake, and she could no longer wait. That evening, while the family gathered in the lavish dining hall, Maria approached the mother carefully. She had prepared herself to speak with respect, clarity, and calm confidence. "Madam," she began softly, "I think I may know why Alexander has been sick. It isn't a disease or something inside his body. I believe it's the food he's been eating." The mother looked surprised, the hint of skepticism flashing across her face. But Maria continued without hesitation. Maria explained her observations in detail. She described the spoiled milk pastries, fruit she had found hidden in the pantry, the forgotten corners of the kitchen, and how Alexander had eaten them, often without anyone noticing. She spoke about the faint smells, the damp areas, and how the boy's reactions matched the timing of the food he consumed. Her voice was calm but steady, and though she was nervous, there was an undeniable clarity in what she said. The father, who had been pacing silently, stopped abruptly. His eyes narrowed, partly in disbelief and partly in concern. "Are you saying that all this sickness, all these tests, have been for nothing?" he asked sharply, his voice a mixture of anger and worry. Maria nodded gently, carefully explaining that the doctors were not at fault. Alexander's symptoms were unusual because the cause was environmental, not medical. It was a combination of spoiled food and his exposure to hidden hazards in the mansion that had triggered the vomiting. The mother's expression softened as she listened. She realized that Maria had observed things no one else had. While the doctors had relied on charts and expensive equipment, Maria had relied on careful attention, empathy, and a connection with Alexander that had revealed what no test could detect. She realized that they had been so focused on high-tech solutions that they had ignored the simple, everyday realities of the household. Maria then detailed the experiments she had conducted subtly. She told them how Alexander responded positively to fresh meals prepared carefully, how he avoided vomiting when spoiled foods were removed, and how even slight changes in his environment made a noticeable difference. The family listened intently, their anxiety slowly shifting into a mixture of shock, guilt, and relief. The explanation was simple, but it was undeniable to demonstrate her point. Maria asked for permission to show the spoiled food she had found. She led the parents to the hidden pantry shelf, revealing the old milk, moldy pastries, and rotten fruits. The smell was unmistakable, a sharp and sour odor that no one could deny. The father's face turned pale, realizing how these items had been overlooked in the grand mansion. The mother covered her mouth, both embarrassed and horrified that such neglect had caused their son so much suffering. The doctors, who had been summoned once again, examined the items and confirmed Maria's findings. They acknowledged that spoiled food could indeed cause Alexander's persistent vomiting. The realization hit everyone like a thunderbolt. Weeks of confusion and failed treatments had been caused not by a rare disease, but by everyday items that had simply been forgotten or ignored. Maria had solved the mystery. The parents felt a rush of mixed emotions: relief that Alexander was not seriously ill, gratitude for Maria's attention and courage, and shame that they had ignored the boy's subtle warnings. They had trusted their wealth, the doctors, and their household staff. Yet no one had noticed what Maria had uncovered through quiet observation. The father, usually proud and authoritative, felt humbled. He realized that money and status could not replace attention, care, and genuine concern for a child's well-being. Maria's courage had transformed her role in the household. From a quiet maid, she'd become a hero. She had not only uncovered the hidden secret, but had also earned the respect and admiration of everyone in the mansion. Alexander, weak but responsive, smiled faintly when he saw Maria. He had trusted her from the beginning, and now her efforts had brought him relief. His small hands clutched hers in gratitude, a gesture that warmed her heart and strengthened her sense of purpose. The family immediately acted to rectify the situation. All spoiled and potentially harmful foods were removed. Storage areas were cleaned thoroughly. New practices were introduced to ensure that no item would ever be forgotten or neglected again. The kitchen staff received careful instructions on proper storage, and Alexander was provided with fresh, safe meals prepared with meticulous attention. Slowly, his strength returned, his vomiting ceased, and his energy and spirits improved. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the mansion changed. The tension and anxiety that had gripped every corner began to lift. Laughter returned to Alexander's room, and the previously silent halls felt alive again. The parents learned an invaluable lesson. Wealth could buy comfort, medicine, and luxury, but it could not replace vigilance, care, and the insight that comes from truly observing and listening. Maria's quiet dedication had reminded them of this fundamental truth. Maria herself remained humble throughout. She never sought praise or recognition. Her only concern had been Alexander's well-being. Yet her actions could not be ignored. The parents ensured she received acknowledgement, not just as a maid, but as someone who had saved their child. They rewarded her with gratitude, trust, and respect that went beyond the typical roles in the household. Her courage and observation had not only solved a medical mystery, but it also transformed the aximanics of the mansion. Alexander, now healthy and energetic, often looked for Maria around the house. He had developed a deep trust and affection for her, knowing that she had been the one to care for him when others had failed to understand. In his innocent way, he tried to help her with small chores, wanting to repay her for saving him. The bond between them became a quiet but powerful symbol of trust, care, and courage. The family also reflected on their own mistakes. They realized that their pride, reliance on wealth, tendency to overlook the observations of those they considered lower had almost caused a tragedy. Maria's insight had proven that solutions often come from unexpected sources, and that humility and attentiveness were just as important as knowledge and resources. The incident changed the way the family interacted not only with Alexander, but also with the household staff. Everyone learned to value observation, communication, and attention to detail. In the end, the revelation was more than just the solution to a medical mystery. It was a story of courage, observation, and quiet determination. Maria had uncovered what the doctors could not, what wealth and status had blinded the family to, and in doing so, had restored health, happiness, and balance to the household. Her actions showed that sometimes the most profound solutions come from patience, empathy, and careful attention, rather than money, power, or advanced technology. Through Maria's courage, Alexander finally recovered, the family learned humility, and the mansion returned to its lively, joyful self. The lesson of the hidden secret and the maid who discovered it would remain with the family forever. It was a story of vigilance and care, of quiet heroes making the impossible possible, and of a child saved not by wealth or authority, but by the simple, powerful act of being truly seen and understood. Alexander's recovery was gradual, but remarkable. After the spoiled food had been removed from the mansion and fresh, carefully prepared meals were consistently given to him, his strength began to return. His vomiting ceased almost immediately, and he could finally sleep through the night without waking in pain or discomfort. The relief in the household was palpable. The once tense, silent halls were now filled with laughter, chatter, and the comforting sounds of a family returning to normalcy. Maria continued to play a central role in his recovery. She carefully monitored his meals, making sure he ate slowly, stayed hydrated, and avoided any food that might upset his delicate stomach. Alexander, who had once been fearful and withdrawn, began to trust again not just in Maria, but in the safety of his home. He smiled more freely, laughed at small jokes, and even asked to help Maria with simple kitchen chores. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, built on trust, gratitude, and the shared relief of overcoming a frightening ordeal. The parents were deeply affected by the experience. They had been consumed by worry, frustration, a desperate desire to fix what seemed unfixable, relying heavily on doctors, tests, and their wealth. But this situation had taught them something priceless. Some problems could not be solved with money or influence alone. Their humility grew as they recognized that Maria, quiet and often overlooked member of their household, had been the key to saving their son. The lesson was profound. They had to value observation, attention, and compassion over status or authority. The father, once confident in his ability to control every aspect of life, now walked more thoughtfully through the mansion. He would check in with Alexander personally, asking how he felt and listening attentively to his son's concerns. The mother, who had been busy with social functions and appearances, now spent more time at home, engaged in Alexander's daily life. She watched him eat, played with him in the garden, and supported him emotionally, learning that care and presence were more valuable than any gift or luxury. Maria, though humble, received the recognition she deserved. The family publicly acknowledged her role in uncovering the source of Alexander's illness. They praised her courage, keen observation, and dedication, making it clear to the household staff that her contribution had been extraordinary. For Maria, the recognition was not the goal, but it brought her a quiet satisfaction and the knowledge that her efforts had truly made a difference. She was no longer just a maid, performing daily chores. She was a hero in the eyes of the family and a trusted guardian of Alexander's well-being. Alexander's days slowly returned to the playful energy of childhood. He ran through the mansion's gardens, climbed trees, and played with his toys with abandon. The fear and anxiety that had shadowed him for weeks began to fade. For the first time in a long while, he felt safe and healthy. He sometimes glanced at Maria with a smile, silently acknowledging the role she had played in helping him regain his strength. The simple gestures, the gentle hand she had held during moments of fear, the freshly prepared meals, the quiet watchfulness had left a lasting impact on the boy's heart. The household staff, inspired by Maria's actions, also began to work with more care and attention. They realized that even in a mansion filled with wealth, small oversights could have serious consequences. Storage practices were improved, kitchens were organized more efficiently, and communication between staff members became clearer. Maria's example had set a new standard, showing that vigilance, empathy, and attention to detail were as important as skill or experience. The parents also reflected deeply on their own behavior. They realized that they had relied too heavily on wealth and authority to solve problems, neglecting the insights of those they considered lower in status. They had overlooked Alexander's subtle complaints, dismissed Maria's observations at first, and assumed that money could fix everything. The experience humbled them, teaching them that empathy, listening, and careful observation were invaluable qualities, sometimes more powerful than wealth or influence. Alexander, in turn, learned lessons of his own. Though young, he began to understand the importance of speaking up when something felt wrong, of paying attention to his own body and trusting those who cared for him. He had experienced fear, discomfort, and uncertainty, but he had also seen the courage and compassion of Maria. This experience shaped his character, teaching him resilience, gratitude, and the value of those who act quietly yet decisively for the sake of others. The mansion itself seemed to transform alongside the family. No longer a place of tension and fear, it became a home filled with warmth, laughter, and careful attention. The lessons of the past weeks influenced daily life. The family was more attentive to Alexander, the staff more conscientious in their duties, and everyone more aware that even the smallest details could have significant effects. What had once been a house of opulence and routine became a home of care, attention, and thoughtful presence. Maria's influence continued subtly. Though she resumed her duties as a maid, she remained vigilant, quietly ensuring that Alexander's environment remained safe and healthy. The family treated her with respect and gratitude, consulting her when small household issues arose, recognizing her insight as valuable beyond her official role. Maria's humility and dedication made her beloved not just by Alexander, but by the entire household. As she had earned trust through action rather than authority, the parents also took deliberate steps to educate themselves and the staff. They implemented regular checks of food storage, cleanliness, and environmental safety, ensuring that no hidden dangers could threaten their family again. They held meetings with the staff, emphasizing the importance of observation, reporting unusual occurrences, and caring for the children attentively. The family learned that prevention and careful attention were far more effective than constant reliance on external experts. As weeks turned into months, Alexander's health fully returned. He was active, happy, and thriving. The illness that had once dominated every moment of the household now felt like a distant memory. Maria remained a constant presence, quietly watching over him, ensuring he remained safe, and providing guidance when needed. The bond between them deepened into a relationship built on trust, care, and mutual respect, a bond that would last for years. The story of Alexander's illness and recovery became a turning point for the family. They learned that wealth could not replace human vigilance, empathy, and careful attention. They understood the power of observing, listening, and acting with compassion. Maria, who had quietly uncovered the hidden cause of Alexander's suffering, became a symbol of these lessons, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary people, performing ordinary duties, can achieve extraordinary things when they act with care, intelligence, and courage. In the end, the mansion was no longer just a place of luxury. It had become a home shaped by attention, empathy, and human connection. Alexander had regained his health, the parents had gained humility, and Maria had earned recognition, respect, and a lasting bond with the family she had helped. The experience transformed everyone involved, leaving lessons that went far beyond the initial illness. It was a story of vigilance, courage, empathy, and the quiet heroism of a maid who noticed what everyone else had missed. The family never forgot what Maria had done. Her actions had saved Alexander, restored peace to the household, and reminded everyone that true care comes not from wealth or status, but from observation, understanding, and a willingness to act when it matters most. Alexander grew up with gratitude, the parents grew wiser and more attentive, and Maria remained a quiet yet powerful presence in the home, proof that courage and care, even in small, overlooked hands, can change lives forever.